Welcome back to the Make Planning Make Sense podcast. I'm Aaron Zimmerman and I'm a director at Central Planning Consultancy. My colleague and co-host Alex Roth was unfortunately in the Schengen zone when we recorded today's interview, but he will be back with us in the studio next week. And I'm excited to say that the pod is now on social media. Find us on Instagram, Blue Sky, and X, son of Twitter, at MPMS Podcast. Check us out, give us a follow, and let us know what you think. In this episode, I sit down with Neil Cawood, director at Anderson, Wild and Harris. Neil is a chartered surveyor for Daylight Sunlight and Rights of Light Matters. The topic for today is daylight and sunlight as town planning considerations, and we did talk about that. But as I reflected on the interview, it was pretty clear that the narrative arc was about something else. In the edited transcript, the word anxiety appears 20 times. The word nervous, 7, and trust, 5. So it's about daylight sunlight, yeah, but it's also a conversation about the culture in town planning. Now, it's certainly not groundbreaking to point out that anxiety and overwhelm and mistrust are problems in our professions. And it's certainly not unique to the private sector or the public sector. But the episode definitely isn't a sob story. I mean, who would want to listen to that exactly, right? What I hear when I listen back to this episode is that anxiety can delay delivery and distort outcomes. And the interpersonal element of planning is as important as the technical and strategic skill sets. And nobody's perfect and nobody's immune to the challenges within the culture of town planning at the moment. But a great planner, a great agent, a great practitioner will always work to build that mutual respect with their counterparts. When the phone call connects, when the meeting is in person, we get better outcomes in less time and with less effort, and the value and the outcomes of our work are reassured. Here is our conversation with Neil Cawood. Neil Cawood, director at Anderson, Wild and Harris. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So just to start us off, you and I know each other. We've worked together on more than a handful of projects. I know what you do, but could you share what you do for our listeners so they can get a sense of your work?
So I work as a director within the neighbourly matters sphere of surveying, which is an interesting area, at least to me, and contains the planning side of things, the BRE, daylight and sunlight element, the civil rights of light element, and generally speaking, among a few other things like glare studies, the Party Wall Act and condition schedules. But most of my work is on the light side of things, and my project experience is right from very small domestic projects, everything in between, up to, 600 unit multi-tower schemes in central London over 15 years or so.
Damn.
It's quite a while. In fact, it's over that. I'm doing myself a bit of a disservice. Over 15 years.
To our listeners, he's looking into the middle distance with these really glassy eyes right now, and it's a bit hard to watch.
Too long. No, in all seriousness, it's been a while, but it's been a pleasurable near couple of decades working in this. It has changed in the last couple of decades, for good and for bad.
So rights of light, that stuff, party wall, that's not planning. That's not what feeds into the planning application and to the decision making here. But daylight and sunlight do.
Daylight and sunlight does. In terms of the planning side of things, the guidance is effectively the Building Research Establishment's 2022 Daylight and Sunlight Guidance.
The BRE.
Yeah. It was first brought out in 1991. Then there was the 2011 guidance, which most of my projects have been under. And of course, subsequently, the 2022 guidance, which came out after a quite significant delay due to COVID and various other things.
I remember you had thoughts on the 2022 guidance. We don't need to get into them necessarily, but yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, some might say that it was a slightly lazy update. I would, of course, never suggest that that's the case. And I'm glad that they've kept the 1991 VW Golf that was in the first edition, the second edition and the third edition. But I just think the changes weren't, in my opinion, quite enough to encourage local authorities to really consider the need to be flexible and look at context and that contextual prism, which is important with any scheme.
And that guidance fits into planning policy, usually via the local plan, that says the natural light levels in a room should accord with the guidance. We can be clear about definition of terms, there's natural light, which is light that comes from the sun. And then within that could be daylight, the more diffuse, bouncing around the atmosphere and off of objects kind of light, or sunlight, which is that direct line to the sun, creates a shadow kind of light.
Exactly that, yeah. I mean, sometimes this is one of the things that I often go through where people are saying, well, hang on, it's a north-facing window. It might be a north-facing window, but it's still getting daylight. It may not get sunlight, but you don't look out of a north-facing window and see blackness. Right. So, yes, we receive daylight through any aperture, whichever orientation it is. Inevitably, the lux levels are higher when you're within that swing of the sun for obvious reasons. You're getting sunlight. And, you know, when we're within daylight and sunlight, you've got the further split, which is your internal light level. So how does the proposed building going to be for future residents? And then you've got the other element, which is how does the construction of this massing impact neighbouring amenity? So this is why there are nuances in terms of the tests and lux levels and things like that within and around a building.
All right, I want to kick this around for the sake of exposition. So you're saying daylight sunlight is a very important consideration, which makes sense, but it's also still wrong to expect all new development to fully accord with the BRE guidance.
And the guidance recognises that, there is a BS, a British Standard element within it, which means it's accepted that there will be some flexibility and lux levels may not be quite as high in an urban environment, etc., etc. So that is a given. Whether it goes far enough, I would say probably not.
Yeah.
My opinion on daylight and sunlight, for what it's worth, is that it is an incredibly important consideration. We all know the health benefits that good daylight and sunlight brings to people.
Yeah.
It's been known for thousands of years. And the Victorians knew exactly what they were doing, and the people indeed before them in terms of building design. If next time you walk down a terrace street, particularly in more central parts of town, you'll notice that the ground floor windows are bigger than the windows at the top. And the reason for that, of course, is that the lower levels struggled for daylight and sunlight. So I totally appreciate the importance of good daylight and sunlight standards. Any issue I have with the way the guidance is interpreted is that there needs to be a recognition that, there is a reality as to what light levels will be in any given area, and the importance of looking through a prism and saying, look, I get we want decent, well-performing buildings, but also this is a dense part of town and reality needs to bite at that point. So look, from my perspective, I think that pushing for good daylight and sunlight is a good thing. We should be.
Agreed.
Officers should be pushing for it. But it needs to be tempered with that reality that we've got in town. And of course, all the other disciplines going for, their optimal solution for any given scheme.
Yeah, I completely agree. I got my planning master's at Glasgow Uni, so I know what February is there. London is better for sure, but it's not that far off.
I totally get the importance of it. It is a key driver. And in saying that, I get it when there is a daylight and sunlight impact as to why it's up there on top reasons for objecting to a project. But I'm right back to that. Look, this is an urban environment. It needs to be sensibly interpreted.
Yeah.
And that's not to say this is a race to the bottom in any shape or form. This is quite simply saying, can we have a sensible conversation about what is reasonable for any given area?
Is this still going to be a good place to live?
Precisely.
Yeah.
Precisely. London, particularly, given it's a global city, has historically had very low-rise buildings. Daylight and sunlight has, in very central parts, been very higher than you would get, say, in, Paris, which I know isn't a tall city, but ultimately there is a recognition that every street is 5-6 plus floors.
Yeah. Berlin, Budapest, Vienna, it's the continental typography, the 5 to 6 stories, inner courtyard, perimeter block.
Yeah, and guess what? Those lowest levels, this is going to surprise you, they might not meet the BRE guidance. I know.
Their townscape typology is frankly more sustainable, and those flats can be gorgeous.
I think the other thing in London is that, I kind of noticed that well-heeled areas, they generally stay like that, right? There's quite a lot of pressure to keep those stucco buildings.
Do it right the first time, that's what I say.
Maybe those single-owner 5-storey townhouses in Chelsea are the way forward, Aaron. But no, look, my point is that There just needs to be an acceptance that we can't always hit the guide. We'll never always hit the guide. If we want to build to any sensible height in the areas we can build in, London. The most significant issue, and indeed fear when we're doing some work, in my experience, is this, idea that I have a good idea, a very good idea of what is sensible for an area, but there is a huge amount of anxiety when we're reporting in terms of whether the local authority will accept that interpretation. And this goes right to the core of everything we do.
This is the third podcast episode where somebody's used the word anxiety, or maybe fourth, depending on how the Heritage one was split. But is this a therapy podcast now?
I think it might be.
Make you a cup of tea and just hear your thoughts. And
it's a good tea, yes. And but no, and yes, I would say it's a very appropriate word, because as a consultant, you want to maximize, or sensibly maximize, efficient use of land. You know what is, or you should know what is reasonable for a given area. But the problem is, A, the local authority may not see it that way, and B, clients quite frequently, particularly those that haven't done a huge amount of daylight and sunlight work, expect almost a binary sort of result. And there is a lot of grey, and there's a lot of grey in all elements of planning, I guess. But because our sphere is numerical, there is often this idea that, yes, no is problematic. And I would say, well, ideally everything would be yes. But again, I don't think that is making efficient use of land. So you would expect some transgressions if you're making the most of a scheme. And it's all about interpreting those transgressions. And it creates anxiety, because not everybody is going to think about those issues in the same way that I guess you think they should.
Okay, so there's a degree of professional judgment in it. There's a degree of disagreement within that professional judgment. That's fair, right? That's planning writ large as well, right? And so when you double click on one of these single issues and you zoom in, it turns out that it's sort of the same framework of judgment and interpretation and data-led analysis, but also kind of, when you see it, and it kind of depends on what you actually want to achieve out of that relative to all the other considerations.
And so, it generates back to the anxiety side of things, because, I often think this as a scheme is good accommodation. There will always be an area closest to the window which receives suitable levels of light. Will the local authorities see it that way? That's where the anxiety comes in, because the answer is not always. And it's always refreshing when you do get that relationship and you're working with them and they understand it and they get it.
Bit of courage, bit of experience, right?
Experience is a big part of what we do.
Yeah.
I've worked on in and around 500 schemes. And what's quite nice about that is when I'm looking at a scheme, I've got an idea of whether the internal light levels are, in my view, acceptable for any given area.
Yeah.
And the impact on the neighbours. There is, of course, guidance with Secretary of State decisions and various prominent appeals as to what was found to be acceptable in a particular type of grain. Mm-hmm. But nonetheless, experience is an important facet, for sure.
Yeah. There are authorities with local plan policies that say new residential development will meet the BRE guidance.
Yes.
Which you're making a face for those of you listening at home. But it rankles because I think it does contradict the NPPF quite directly.
Yes, and indeed the BRE guide, because, the guidance does state that it isn't something that has to be slavishly met, and that degree of flexibility is important. The danger is that when that isn't the case, that makes sense. Does
that happen?
Oh, does it? Has it ever happened to me? Yes, is the answer to that, Aaron. And hence my earlier anxiety or reference there too. Look, the danger of saying, yes, it must comply with the BRE guidance is that they take the numbers and say it must comply with the BRE guidance.
Yeah, they go to the appendix at the back of your report and it just makes sure it all says yes. And if there's a no or two,
then it doesn't comply with the BRE guidance. And so there's the issue.
Unacceptable quality of living.
An egregious impact.
Yeah.
But look, in all seriousness,
Yeah.
I think all this comes down to whether it is interpreted correctly. And there's the issue. There is the issue all day long.
Can you give an example of the guidance being interpreted in the way that feels right to you? You know, what's a good example of a sensible approach?
You and I, some years ago, worked on a scheme in Tower Hamlets, and
shout out.
Yeah, it was a good scheme. I can't
love you, Tower Ham.
But I can't quite remember how tall it was. 27 floors, 25. It moved between the two, something like that. But it was a relatively big scheme, and you know, it created some impact. But inevitably, it created some impacts. And hey, guess what? Some of the units on the lowest levels did not perform as well as a open plan barn in a field in Surrey.
You said the word barn with so much disdain. I just really appreciated that.
Nothing against barns, quite simply because it's the light levels that you get in those damn barns in the middle of
these
a green
short
field.
Freestanding buildings, because that's what the BRE guidance is based on, right? Sort of a greenfield development paradigm.
I would say my position, and I think the actual position, is that, for example, what's called vertical sky component and the desired level, the restrictions that generate that level, I would associate with a suburban grain. So it's very difficult to suggest that that level, that ideal, which incidentally is 27%, is going to happen in the centre of Tower Hamlets, because it ain't.
Yeah.
It's just the position. Unless, of course, you're in Tower Hamlets looking across the river, in which case you may well get way above that, but they're the lucky ones.
So Tower Hamlets, they're on the good list.
They're on my, I don't need to pop a Valium before I send a report. You know, they get it more than most.
What we're saying is that they understand their ambitions to make the most effective use of their land in a context of good growth.
Quite, absolutely. I mean, ultimately, you know, the schemes that I've done, particularly the larger ones, will need or generally need a peer review. So you know they're taking the advice on this. And in some respects, that's quite a good thing, because ultimately, you know, somebody who has worked on a number of these schemes of this size has an idea of what it looks like. And as long as you've done your report properly, I would suggest there's nothing to fear.
I'm reminded that, Laurie Handcock at ICNI talked about the anxiety of officers to take all of these things into a planning balance, many of which, like daylight and sunlight, require a kind of interpretive balance on the merits of that one issue already. Richard Ashdown at ULL Property talked about the anxiety of officers to bring proposals to a committee where they're, I mean, in his case, it was a viability question, but you can imagine as well, our members won't go for this, right? And I think you're recognizing that here, you know, that same kind of phenomenon, but you're also recognizing an anxiety you have, right, when you're submitting a document.
Yeah, absolutely. In my view, how can you not have a degree of anxiety when you've done a lot of reports that, I mean, look, I should add, generally speaking, do go my way, but there are those where you look at it and you it just doesn't, and it should. And I guess that's why we do end up at, you know, appeals with these things. Yeah. And maybe sometimes it should, but there is that anxiety as to how, particularly when the impacts are there, and often justifiably there, how will they be interpreted? You know, you're sandwiched between the case officer and the client on occasion, because they're anxious. They want to see the scheme come forward. It's a tricky position.
Where does that anxiety come from? It's just, so you're submitting the document.
Well, I mean, in terms of where it comes from, I guess it comes from experience of schemes that should go the right way, but don't go the right way.
So sort of like, I can kind of see what's coming.
Often you can't. And that's the worst thing.
Okay.
I mean, no, that's not quite
uncertainty. Right. Yeah.
You can, look, sometimes you can see it coming down the tracks. You know it's coming. Other times, simply no. You put in a report and you get feedback that really you don't agree with. And they do occasionally blindside you. It's those ones where you're not expecting that they come out of the woodwork that give you a degree of trepidation when the impacts are there. Mm-hmm. I'd say 9 times out of 10 when you're sort of middle of the road in terms of performance. Yeah. Everything's fine.
And this report and all of the other reports, so far as they are material to an actual decision being made, should be scrutinized, right?
Agreed.
So yeah. I'm definitely not hearing, why are you questioning my report? I've told you it's already acceptable. I'm just reminded of a scheme in South London Borough that actually we worked on together.
I think I know the one.
Shan't be named.
It's in a dense urban node.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It is a dense urban node, listeners. It definitely is quite a dense part of town.
And it was a residential proposal.
Indeed.
in a tall building zone.
For sure.
It was allocated for residential use, and it is surrounded by existing tall buildings.
It's surrounded by an absolute monster, if I recall.
Just, maybe this is a question for the audience if you wanted to write in. Are the daylight sunlight levels on the lower floors of that building likely to meet BRE targets?
Yes, Aaron, they should all meet the targets on the lowest low. Yeah, so I mean, it is a very good example. And I think we were both a little bit surprised on that, in that, we submitted it. It was, look, hey, what do you expect? It's kind of, the numbers weren't really bad, but the lowest levels didn't meet the guidance. And, some were better than others on those lowest levels. And overall, the building performed well. So I don't think either of us really expected that one to be problematic. But I think this is a really good example that, you're dealing with case officers face to face on the phone much more than I am. But I think it would be right to say that they were surprised by the results in this case.
I certainly don't want to speak for the officers, but that word anxiety comes back to mind.
Yeah.
This is below BRE. What can we do about it? Well, nothing really. And actually we did. So my memory of it is very much sort of a process related memory, because this anxiety or trepidation resulted in 6-8 months of subtle redesigns, retesting, remodeling, redesigns, retesting, remodeling. Too much of it guesswork, by the way.
Yeah, I mean...
And it didn't really change much.
Not massively. No, I mean...
Some of the no's became yeses, but...
Some of the yeses became no.
Also true, yeah. And that numerical exercise was completely and utterly divorced from the lived experience of any of those units. That is not the perception of a resident to go from it's dark in here to it's bright in here.
Look, I completely agree. There was nothing really in terms of design moves that we could do which would fundamentally change the picture. It could be that they just needed to get comfortable with the fact that we were never going to get above a certain level. Now, you could say, look, this should be entirely expected. But if I'm feeling charitable, I suppose the counter to that is, look, guys, can you just demonstrate that this really can't be better, I suppose.
Yeah.
And, it puts me under pressure in terms of maximizing the design with the architect. Of course, weighing other disciplines as well, like overheating, which is another key one, which maybe we'll touch on in a bit, about getting too much light in there. You push for these very high lux levels and then everyone bakes. Did it go on longer than it should have done? Yeah, it did. It became overly complicated. But I don't think the idea of looking at it and seeing whether we could strive for anything better, and of course we did, is a bad one. I just think it went on too long. And occasionally, hopefully you'll agree that sometimes a professional saying, look, this will happen if I do that, should be enough. But often it's like, yeah, thanks for that, but prove it. And it costs, it takes time, and it delays things. So probing and looking at these things is an important part of the process, but have some trust in consultants.
Yeah. Sort of like prove it, and then it's like, but that's what's going to happen, right? Right.
This is it. What can I bring to this? Well, look, I've got some experience, and this is why I think that's going to happen. Yeah. And I don't think we need to go through that exercise. Over the schemes I've worked on, frequently officers will just accept a letter stating, look, we've done this, we've done that. We don't feel we need to do this for these reasons.
Yeah. We work together on a lot of those things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, hey, I don't think it's like that is a massive problem, but...
Yeah. And our role as agents, we're tending to sort out exactly what information is needed at what stage with the officer before we turn to you and say, hey, can you do more work on this? Can you get a new instruction to pick more of this up or whatever? And very, very often we're doing exactly what you're saying, is to just kind of get it down to like, look, we respect that you want something in addition in the planning record to demonstrate that this step has been taken. We don't need to redo the CAD model, right?
Yeah. And I see the communication quite often from you,
and it tends to work, it tends to work. Is it like an anxiety for JR risk? Judicial review where a third party or either party can petition the courts for a review of the lawfulness of the decision?
I guess potentially, but I think hey, you probably have more experience here, but is it not a question of degree? I think if it's, we're not going to test this neighbouring building because we think it'll be okay, and it's immediately next to it, that's a big JR issue. But saying, hey, we're in a dense in-urban location, there's only so many ways we can cut this is a perfectly reasonable statement. And I would say, and hopefully not live to regret, relatively safe from a JR perspective.
And that's exactly what the officer's reports for successful applications in those contexts say. And it's reminding me actually of episode 4, Wait, Don't Tell Me, spelled the way that you think, where we talked about what actually is required to be demonstrated in the decision making. And it's not that much. There's actually an incredible amount of discretion and power held by the decision maker. A lawful decision actually doesn't require 500 pages of documents or whatever. It really doesn't.
Yeah, I'll take your word for it. But I think, look, given my discipline, I think exactly that. It's a question of degree, and there does need to be some trust. So yeah, I'm not even sure where we went with this one, but I think it's about trust and having trust in consultants.
We will be right back. I want to come back to what you mentioned about overheating as well.
Okay, it's a good one.
Because daylight and sunlight is fundamentally about the aperture of the window, the depth of the room, and the positioning of the window, geospatially, relative to the path of the sun. Yeah,
and where it sits, big one, Aaron, you'll remember this, it always comes up, is there a balcony above it or another restriction?
The baseball cap effect.
The baseball cap. So, is it wearing a baseball cap? Can it see the sky immediately above it? And all these things influence the internal light levels. And of course, we're always working through them at DTMs, that kind of thing, to make the building perform. But inevitably, there are competing elements here. You've got to provide amenity space. Where does that amenity space go? Often off living rooms, often units are stacked to make them more efficient, etc., etc. In actual fact, I'm not an overheating engineer, but having a balcony above a large window acts like a brise-soleil and often will help with reductions and overheating. But yeah, there is this competing disciplines in that if you've got a south-facing facade and a big window, it's going to overheat, and the problem being if you've got a very deep LKD, there's an expectation, if there is an expectation that it has to meet or should meet somewhere close to BRE guidance, it's probably going to overheat. You might find a marginal deep room, which looks almost suboptimal from a daylight sunlight perspective, is cooking from an overheating point of view because it's south facing with a big window. And what do you expect to happen in July? Yeah. And when we've ran this, you and I have done this, you look at, you produce an Excel spreadsheet of which units pass and which units fall short of the guidance. And you've got one column for daylight and sunlight, and the other column's overheating. And where one passes for one discipline, it fails for the other. So again, and the BRE guide doesn't really talk about this. I mean, not in any great detail. But I think it is an important facet, and there is a reasonable defense to say, well, look, if we make this aperture any larger, then it's going to fall short of overheating performance. It is a really important consideration. And of course, increasingly an important consideration. We've all been baking in London, for the last 15, 20 years.
The knock-on effects continue even further because then, maybe what's your preference, the light or the overheating analysis outcome? The light. Okay, great, we got to steer. But now it's just kind of squeezed the balloon and the fight has popped all the way down to mechanical ventilation or not.
And I guess cost. I mean, look, hey, I don't deal with that, but ultimately it's going to cost more. You can put all this plant in, where does it go, et cetera, carbon and everything that goes with that, for sure.
So the one thing I would just say is it's kind of funny how often you're squeezing the balloon, offsetting the problem to another issue, squeezing it there, offsetting it to another issue, until eventually people just get tuckered out, I think honestly, because the professional team that prepared the application thought about these things already.
But sometimes you have to go through that process. You have to squeeze the balloon and show what you think will happen does happen. And then when they squeeze that element of the balloon, it goes the other way or even in a different direction.
Yeah, it's options testing.
Precisely. Yeah. It's just how to make that more efficient.
That's a natural component of the design-led approach required by London Plan policy.
Okay, well, I feel like we do that a lot.
D3.
I'll have to read that on the way home. But no, in all seriousness, I think the frustration is there's too much of it. It takes too long.
It's about just getting to a place where everyone's happy and understanding the individual priorities of the individual decision maker. We've definitely been in situations where it has been a good thing, often through pre-app, right? Not during a determination.
Those are the best projects. When you go through that productive, iterative approach to it, but not only that, when they accept it, I'm thinking of a case that I had in Southwark, and it was a large existing building, which was actually a former magistrate's building, which absolutely needed to be regenerated and renewed and extended sensibly. And I was again nervous. Will they realise that we've got this deep footprint? Will they accept that we've got this deep footprint, and that inevitably, say, some of the LKD, the living kitchen dining rooms, will be approaching, say, 8 meters deep, just because of the nature of the existing building? Going into that design review panel, I was really nervous about it. But what was quite nice was that Southwark got it, and we could have a proper discussion about the fact that, in a flat, a living kitchen dining area has the highest standard, and hey, it may not meet standard. And again, I shouldn't be nervous about having that discussion, but I was. And what was lovely about it was Southwark went, yeah, we get it. We understand. Yeah. We understand that this is going to be problematic, at least locally. And you work with them.
I liked that you were saying, you're happy to have that conversation. I thought we were going to go in a different direction than that, because there's so many conversations that we have every time. And you'd like to think, why are we having this conversation? Like, we can, right? But, we've all danced this dance. Aren't your feet sore too? So
are you saying that effectively, given the constraints that we've got and the many disciplines, you're not going to get the optimal solution in every single discipline? It's just simply, there's always some give, right? There has to be. You can't have everything topping out.
Well, I guess I'm saying when these dysfunctions occur, I don't assume that they're deliberately gaslighting me.
Okay. Look, maybe the case officers are nervous about it too, because ultimately, if they are too effusive about a building that isn't necessarily complying at this earlier stage, then they don't want to be bound by it either. They want to be able to see the numbers, weigh this thing up. Is it reasonable to expect case officers to go, Neil, I totally get it. I'm happy with that impact. Signed off, done. Next discipline. When they've got so much other, this thing is a balance, right? So ultimately, if the building performs about right, is that acceptable when everything else is unacceptable? Well,
Well, I have thoughts on that. I don't think that the acceptability of one issue should hinge on the acceptability of another.
Fair. This speaks to your, this is what's quite nice about this is you see the big picture, right? And I appreciate that might sound like I'm flattering you, but it's factually the case. You see,
bear witness.
The one and only time. But you see the big picture. I am but one wheel in this particular activity, and I guess some of the trepidation and anxiety in what I do is that sometimes I'll submit a report and I'm almost, I know that there is significant impacts and I'm expecting some issues here, but they love the scheme. And I don't know they love the scheme because I'm not at the top of the tree kind of looking down on this thing, but of course you guys are. So yeah, there is often an apparent lack of logic as I see it, because I put a scheme in where I'm expecting some questions. Certainly the numbers I'd be happy to justify, or else I wouldn't be putting it in. But the fact is that it doesn't even get questioned. And yeah, I later find out that they love the scheme. Conversely, and these are the schemes that will put it in, and I won't expect any questions whatsoever. Yeah. And again, maybe they hate the scheme, but I start getting loads of questions about daylight and sunlight that I wouldn't necessarily expect.
Which actually invites the suggestion that assessment is not determinative. Like, if they love it, even despite bad daylight sunlight, then it's fine. And if they hate it, then if there's bad daylight sunlight, then all of a sudden that's completely unacceptable. Isn't it just, maybe it is gaslighting in those cases? Because I'm reminded of the interview with Tom Slater at T2S Architecture in episode 3. Uh-huh. And a phrase came up. How does something get permission? How does it not get permission? Where there's a will, there's a way. And it could still be a real belly flop and get permission if they love the scheme.
Look, absolutely, that happens. It's a fair question. But I think at that point, everybody remembers that this should be interpreted flexibly. It is only guidance.
After all.
Exactly that. On other occasions, it appears that slavish adherence must be the order of the day. But as I say, this is one of your earlier questions, where does the anxiety come from? And I think it's because I simply don't see the bigger picture. And there is a degree of variance in terms of whether they're going to recognize that it should be interpreted flexibly from project to project. The older I get and the more projects I do, the happier I am to stand behind them at appeal. And historically, I might add, I've done well in that particular arena. And that supports the view that we are generally, as a practice, going down the right avenue in terms of internal performance of buildings and the proposal's impact on neighbouring amenity. So hopefully that answers your question.
I'm not even sure I asked a question, to be honest, there. I really appreciate your working with me here. Yeah, no, it's actually quite interesting that there is a particular comfort that you have in the quality of your work based on inspectors' decisions, but you have an anxiety at the local level.
I mean, look, would it be fair to say, the answer to that is yes, but would it be fair to say that you yourselves have the same feeling? Are they more objective, I suppose, at inspector level? Is there any truth in that? That's a question for you.
Well, objective's a tricky word because I'd like to think everybody's working toward the same outcomes. I mean, I know that some, LPAs are genuinely anti-growth and they don't really care if they just steamroll their housing numbers year after year. But even where the quantum of development's agreed, there can be a lot of nervousness about technical issues like daylight and sunlight. So I think that the scale might be an experience scale as well as an objective, subjective scale.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I guess at inspector level, they must be much more experienced. I'm asking you a few questions here, but I don't often read their CVs. All I would say is that when the chips are down, the projects that I've found were acceptable, but have been considered to be unacceptable locally, have at appeal supported my view.
So daylight sunlight does seem to have a lot of the same challenges that planning has when you zoom out to that sort of multi-factor level. Oh, well, it's about judgment, it's about experience, it's about discretion, it's about interpretation, and it's all kind of data-driven, but also once you get that data, it's all really about everything else. What would you love to see different? What would you love to improve?
I think there would be a greater acceptance of the importance of being flexible in terms of interpretation of the guidance. Don't get me wrong, these things often say flexibility is important, but without any specific examples. And I think that would be useful.
Can you give me some examples of what those might be?
Yeah, look, I get why there's a nervousness about doing that because there's a concern that you're going to get substandard accommodation.
Yeah.
And this is not about providing substandard accommodation. It really goes back to my point, which is just saying, look, we get that it's important. We entirely get it. Yeah. But there needs to be this reality. So do you necessarily put more examples and typical, this must be this, and this is what you're going to get in that environment? I think because of the nature of what we do and the variation therein, it's very difficult to give them absolutes. But I think just the importance of being flexible and recognizing that this is really one of many things and you're just not going to hit target every time, and neither should you when you're looking to make the most efficient use of buildings in certain environments. At that point, it's not about whether it says pass, fail, yes, no.
Right.
And you can end up with these really difficult examples where you've got, for example, a bomb site which hasn't been developed, or you've got a car park to some, commercial building which is no longer viable and clearly needs to be redeveloped in a dense urban part of town. And you've got tower blocks and tall buildings all around it. And guess what? They're enjoying really quite high levels of daylight and sunlight. Some might suggest even, Aaron, unreasonably high daylight and sunlight because they're looking across a completely open site. Now, this is where we get into trouble, right? Because
Ebenezer Cawood, everybody.
Because dare I venture that perhaps they have enjoyed uncharacteristically high, Aaron, levels of daylight and sunlight beyond, dare I venture, what would reasonably be expected for that part of any given urban environment where it is among those other tall buildings. And in that situation, it is really not about yes, no in terms of the results. It is the really important point, and this comes down to experience, is saying what's reasonable for this part of town. And right back to your original question, it's just about people accepting, officers accepting that there is a need to be very flexible and not focus on pass, fail, yes, no. And for consultants not to be very nervous about or anxious about submitting a report that says that, because it might seem obvious to you and I sitting here, but that is always going to be the case in that scenario. And I can sit opposite you and I know that you would always expect that. But you would also agree that the response to that report is often not the one we would expect.
It's not the one that we would expect if we were the philosopher king sitting in the decision-making chair. Yeah.
Imagine that.
I know.
What would also be good is potentially a recognition in the BRE guidance that, and again, you could argue that there is, because there are certain sort of obstruction angles and associated vertical sky component, which is one of the metrics that we use at the back of it. But hey, look, in an inner urban environment, these are typical kind of VSCs, that sort of thing. I mean, we all sort of work to those.
Yeah.
Is it really accepted?
If they like the scheme overall, yeah.
Yeah, we're back to that point, right?
Yeah.
So
if I could sort of play that back to you in the way that I heard it, what we're really talking about is that empowerment and that courage to make individual decisions in a strategic context, right? You said big picture a couple of times. I think that that's another way to say it as well, that it's really all about remembering why we're here and doing the work that we're doing, rather than strictly smudging out as many of the transgressions as you can without creating too many new ones along the way.
yeah, I think that's a reasonable and succinct way of putting it.
Planning balance.
Yeah. But just don't be surprised the numbers aren't great. In that scenario that I just painted. That's it as far as...
Well, I thought you were going to say, don't be surprised when they're surprised that the numbers aren't great.
Don't be surprised when you get a refusal. I mean,
yes, we know from the previous episode that the real reason was viability, but they just added as much as they could, like a Christmas tree. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, hey, you know much more about whether throwing in all those extra reasons for refusal is productive or not. But hey,
I mean, it's definitely eaten into my annual leave, but
and mine on occasion.
Yeah, because I mean, part of our role at the appeal stage is to take all of the stuff that we went through at the application stage, and already we're leaving no stone unturned at the application stage. But then at the appeal stage, if there's a bunch of mud being slung around, you have to reinterpret and reassess all of the information again in the context of the particular mud pies that were thrown, right? Sorry, you need to respond constructively to the specific points raised by the authority.
Yes. Yeah.
It's no small task to recreate a narrative based on grievances that can sometimes be a bit indefensible. The appeal statement of case can't be like, these reasons are full of it, see planning statement.
I was right the first time.
I mean? Yeah.
I mean, look, hey, completely. Yeah.
You have to actually take it seriously.
I mean, I guess what you're saying is that, as far as I can see, but correct me if I'm wrong, that, once it's on the DA and there's a decision notice as a reason for refusal, you've got to go through the process, jump through, and re-review and recheck and, and redefend what you've already defended, I suppose, or ideally so. But
I take your point as well that when you get to appeal, in the unfortunate event that you do, there is a vindication in the quality and the integrity of your work. When that independent third party says, no, you got it right.
Yeah.
Do we as adults potentially still rely too much on external validation?
I know I do. I can't speak for you.
Life is a lifelong process of improvement, isn't it?
You should be a politician.
Yeah.
Mr. Zimmerman. I think you should. But yeah.
Not the first person who said that.
Oh, really?
It could have been said really dryly because someone just wanted to watch me fail badly at something. I don't know. In like a public forum.
You'd make a good parish councillor.
Oh. Well, we're getting a neighbourhood plan, I'm telling you that much.
The village plan.
Yeah. Neil Cawood, director at Anderson, Wild and Harris, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please follow us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to get in touch, then we'd love to hear from you. please write to us at podcast@centralplan.co.uk. Make Planning Make Sense is presented by Central Planning Consultancy and recorded in beautiful London, England. Its executive producer is me, Aaron Zimmerman. Additional production by my colleague and co-host Alex Roth. Marketing and promotion by our colleague Reese Raymond. Graphic design by our colleague Mariam Malaxi. Music by Joseph McDade. From all of us here at Centro, thank you so much for listening.